my name. I'm Farrell, and I am the community lab manager at the MDI Biological Laboratory, and I also coordinate the SEPA project, which Jane alluded to. And it's officially called Data to Action, a secondary school-based citizen science project to address arsenic contamination of well water, but we just call it All About Arsenic. And the story of arsenic in drinking water starts with rocks. This is an example of Ellsworth schist, which is found on Mount Desert Island and the surrounding area. And Sarah Howell will be talking a lot about this later. In some areas, arsenic naturally leaches out of the bedrock into groundwater, particularly in New England. And because of the structure of the bedrock, arsenic distribution can vary wildly from place to place. So you may have high arsenic in your well, but your neighbor doesn't. And this is key to understanding how people interact with their wells. Arsenic can also get into drinking water through contamination from anthropogenic sources. So this is an example of arsenical pesticides being sprayed on potato fields. This was very common practice throughout the 20th century. And we're finding, or we aren't finding, but studies are showing that these pesticides can linger in the soil and have effects downstream of the time they were sprayed. Oh dear, that's weird. Okay, so 46% of people in New Hampshire and 56% of people in Maine rely on private wells for drinking water. And there are two major types of wells, drilled and dug, and the names are pretty self-explanatory. Drilled wells are drilled into the bedrock and dug wells are dug into superficial deposits. And this distinction becomes important when identifying the source of arsenic contamination. This is an example of a well drilling rig at my friend Joe's house. It's pretty big, and he had ended up being a 400-foot well dug, or drilled rather, on Mount Desert Island. So these are big machines. Private wells are not regulated by the state or any other governing body, so it is up to the homeowner to test early and test often for contamination. And this is testing advice from the Maine CDC. They recommend testing your well every year for the elements on the left, bacteria, nitrate, and nitrites. And then you can see the cost there. It ranges from $30 to $60. And then on the right-hand side, every 5 years, you want to test for other contaminants such as arsenic, uranium, iron, manganese, fluoride, pH, lead, and radon. And that is a little more expensive, but when you're thinking about your long-term health, it puts it in perspective a little bit. Okay, so why are we worried about arsenic contamination? In addition to being used historically for murdering your enemies, long-term chronic exposure, as well as short-term acute exposure, can cause a whole host of health problems. And these are just some examples. Increased risk of bladder and other cancers, increased blood pressure, gestational diabetes, harmful changes to the body's hormones, and altering your immune system. And people in Maine and New Hampshire are vulnerable to these health issues with arsenic contamination of wells. And so that's where the SEPA project comes in, the Science and Education Partnership Award. And Jane and others hatched this project to increase testing rates and awareness around drinking water contamination. And it's a partnership between the MDI Biological Laboratory and Dartmouth College. And we received the SEPA award in 2018. It's a 5-year grant engaging students in Maine and teachers in Maine and New Hampshire in sampling wells in their communities. And this flowchart shows our workshop every year at the beginning, or it's during the summer. We train teachers and scientist partners at the Datalit workshop. And then once the school year begins, teachers implement a citizen science project in their schools and address questions like, where is arsenic a problem and what hypotheses do students have? Students collect well water data in their communities and it's archived on anecdata.org, which I will talk about a little bit later. And then they use the data to make graphs and maps and then do some community outreach. This is a screen grab from an Esri story map made by College of the Atlantic student Gabby Morose. And it shows all the samples collected in Maine and New Hampshire since 2018 in yellow, so all those little dots. And all the school locations are in blue. And you'll notice that Maine is color coded. The counties are color coded by the percent of homes with private wells that have had an arsenic water test, with warmer colors having a higher percentage. And New Hampshire we don't have that sort of data for New Hampshire, so that's why it doesn't show up there. But we're hoping to extend our research into those yellow counties that don't have a higher percentage. And so thus far, we've involved 25 schools, and students have collected 1,862 water samples. And you can see the clusters here. You'll hear from John Ramgren, which, oh, yeah, see if you can see my mouse, but right here. So the Waterville High School is there, and yeah. Allaboutarsenic.org is our project website. It's a WordPress site for participants, teachers, and students to learn more about the project. You can use it to link out to data, read FAQs, and access curricular resources. Since the SEPA project is intended to be a national model of STEM education, we hope teachers and students in other areas can use the website to implement their own citizen science projects. Student samples are collected and sent to the Dartmouth Trace Elements Analysis Core, where they are analyzed for arsenic and all the other contaminants you see here. This is actually a test to see how well you know your elemental abbreviations. Students collect metadata along with their sample, including information like location, the type of water source they have, if they have tested for arsenic before, if they have a filtration system, and if so, what it filters for. And we're finding a lot of people don't know the answers to these questions, which is telling in and of itself. So the samples are registered and archived on anecdata.org, a global citizen science platform, and then results are uploaded to the project so samplers can check them at any time. So this is an example of the results that people will get back. So you can see the type of filtration system. This person was comparing a pre and post filtration sample. So on the left-hand side, you see there the sample that is not filtered, and then on the right-hand side, they have either a water pitcher or a refrigerator filter. And you can see how that affects their elements. So like arsenic, you see is 24 before filtration, and then it's down to 1 parts per billion after filtration. Oh, and then families, so if you have an exceedance, families will receive a letter in the mail detailing the results, and then it has information on next steps. And protecting personally identifying information is really key to this project. So we asked permission for everything, and with permission from samplers, the data on Anecdata are available to anyone for viewing and downloading, but we do restrict access to that personally identifying information. So we obfuscate the coordinates of the wells, we privatize fields such as name, address, mailing address, and the permission to share data. And we ask samplers if we can share their data with the CDC, the New Hampshire DES, and other researchers that are doing spin-off projects. Once the classroom data are analyzed at Dartmouth, they are uploaded to Tuva, a data literacy software. And this is a screen grab from Tuva and the Allaboutarsenic data set on there. It's a drag and drop graphing software. And so on the left-hand side, you have all these attributes that are from the metadata students collected, and then you can just pull them over and drag them onto the X and Y axes. And then you can also select what type of graph you want. So this is just the default dot plot. And I pulled the SEPA school name over onto the x-axis and arsenic onto the y. And this graph doesn't really tell you that much, but it does show the frequency of sampling at different schools that are involved in the project. And then this enables students to explore and manipulate the data to create graphs and charts. And then once students have analyzed the data, they work with teachers and scientist partners to mobilize their communities to take action around issues related to private well water safety. And originally we envisioned community meetings, but the pandemic kind of forced us to change our idea of action. And so it's actually expanded quite a bit into some of the things you see here. So students are encouraged to talk to their legislators, submit op-eds, write letters to the editor, and just generally organize around action in their communities. Several projects have grown out of the SEPA grant, and you'll hear from 2 of these groups during this session, including Sarah Hall, College of the Atlantic, and Remy Babich at Maine. Their projects are Arsenic in All Seasons and Beyond Arsenic, effect-directed analyses to predict health outcomes of chemical mixtures in drinking water. And then Jane also mentioned Bridging Disciplines, and they're studying the effects of arsenic on planaria right now. We have a lot of schools involved and a lot of scientist partners, as I mentioned before, and this is all of them listed. And then I don't want to take my entire talking time thanking all of them personally, but here's a list of them. They are invaluable to this project, and we really thank them for their participation. And we are supported by the Science and Education Partnership Award and the Dartmouth Trace Elements Analysis Corps. And that concludes my presentation.